All right, so in this video, we're going to go over basically what happens on the day of the test. So just be aware that that's what we are discussing here as we go a little bit further into this video. Just a general overview of the test day. The first thing that most people want is, if something goes wrong, what should I do? How do I get help? Well, I have been designated as the test coordinator. If you need to call me for whatever reason, there is my phone number there on the screen. Mr. Mumford is the backup test coordinator. He will be doing pretty much the same thing that day. There is his phone number. And then for you people that are giving the accommodations testing, you might want to get a hold of Mr. Gold for whatever reason. So there is his phone number. Jared, I apologize that I did not ask whether or not I could give your phone number out. Sorry. Anyway. You will need the test administration manual actually has how to do a lot of things as well. So if you are stuck and you can't get a hold of one of us or you're scared to, you can try and look in the test administration manual as well that you have as a room supervisor. Okay. There are your test day activities on page 71. That's how it goes. So here is the schedule for the ACT testing on either of those days. Okay. You are asked to arrive at your normal contract time. So we're asked to be here at 7:30. Now, if you are giving the test on the first day, this will be your schedule. If you're not giving the test, you do not need to do all of these things. This is just the day that you are testing. So please, we're going to have, this is right. At 8:15 in the morning, we are going to have a briefing session. And that is just to make sure everybody's on the same page and that you're good to go. Students may arrive at 8 o'clock because that is when we are starting to serve breakfast. But they need to be ready to test by 9 o'clock. The English test takes about 45 minutes, and then the math test comes directly after that and is 60 minutes long. By that time, it should be about 10:50, 5 minutes or so to get started at the latest. And if you're not exactly on time, that's totally fine. Around between 10:50 and 11, you should be giving a break, okay? After that, your testing will resume, and you have 2 more tests, which means, and both of those are 35 minutes long, I believe. I think the reading might actually be 45. I can't remember. I know those tests are not as long, and then around 12:30, 12:45 is when the students should be done at the very latest, okay? And we just dismiss the students. There will be lunch that is served that day as well, so they can eat lunch, and then they are free to go home. And once you're done testing, the rest of the day you are expected to be here, but the rest of the day is yours, okay? A couple of things to know in the briefing session. We'll just go over procedures and last-minute details. Room supervisors, I tried really hard this time to make sure that if you are a room supervisor, you are using your own Chromebooks, okay? So just make sure that all your Chromebooks are plugged in, you're at least familiar with the calculator policy. There are a few signs to post, and we'll have pencils and a roster for every room. Just make sure you have those, okay? So make sure you get them for me as well. It's not that big of a deal. It is just one paper in addition to the admissions tickets that you'll have as well. Won't be that hard, not that big of a deal. We'll talk more about that on the briefing day, okay? As far as the test room goes, everybody has to be facing the same direction. If you can help it towards a clock would be nice, but it is not necessary. Oh, that's a lie. It's not 3 feet of spacing. This time it is 6 feet of spacing between each of your test takers. Make sure that they are appropriately social distancing. Any bulletin boards that may help them need to be covered up. And if you have any temperature or lighting issues, let me know so that we can move you to a different room ahead of time. Okay? You will have to check the students in one by one. Hopefully they brought their IDs. If they did not and you know them, you're fine. If you do not know them, ask them if they know somebody else, either your proctor or somebody close that can verify they are who they are. You should actually have a roll ahead of time so you won't have to write their names down, although that is an option in the little booklet that you have. Okay? These are the acceptable identification that they can have, either by school staff if they are in the yearbook from the year before. So maybe you could ask Marcia if nobody knows them. If they are in the yearbook from the year before, they're good to go. We can consider that as ID. Photo ID from the school works. Driver's license. If they bring a passport, I've never had anybody do that, but if they bring a passport, that's fine as well. Okay? You do want to direct the students to the seat that you want them to sit in. So don't just say sit anywhere. Make sure that they are seated appropriately. If you want to assign them ahead of time where they're going to sit, that's fine. You can make them alphabetical if you want. There is no right way to do that. And it's a lot easier now that we don't have to hand out test booklets. You just make sure each student, you can tell where each of them are. Once you start reading the instructions, once you've started reading the instructions out of the booklet, that is a late arrival, and we do not allow students to take the test after that. There's no catching up. Once they basically everybody's logged on and you start reading the instructions, that is when we will not admit students. And if that happens and you don't want to deal with that student, call me or Mr. Mumford and we can take care of that, okay? And again, these aren't test booklets anymore. That's when we're on the computers. We talked about it in the previous training, but make sure there are no cell phones in the room. And they can't eat or drink anything unless they have an accommodation of some sort, and you should know ahead of time if you have one of those students, okay? So there is a list of calculators that they can use. Again, and we talked about this before, so I don't want to talk about it. It is the student's responsibility to bring a calculator, but if they don't, if you really feel like you want to provide them with one, that's fine, but we will not provide every student with one. So if you're going to provide one, you better make sure that you've got enough for everybody in your room. If they have not figured out where to get a calculator ahead of time, don't let them come down and beg the math teachers. The problem with that is that will make it so testing starts later, which we could run into issues with, okay? The exact timing of the test, we actually don't need to worry about that anymore because the timing is taken care of on the computer. You don't have to do any of that stuff. So again, when you begin reading the verbal instructions, follow the directions, follow the script exactly, reading the no writing portion. And anytime it tells you to provide a seal code, you should have printed those off previously if you are a room supervisor, so you will give those when you are prompted to do so, okay? You will, while the students are testing, fill out a seating diagram. Now, the one you're going to get is slightly different than this one in that this entire space that we have right here will actually be blank. So you'll just put a desk right here and who the student is, and then here, maybe over here. You just put all those desks to show where each student was sitting, okay? For the break, there's 15 minutes after test 2. It is not a lunch. It is not a breakfast. It is nothing like that. I would prefer that the students don't try and go get food. They do have 15 minutes. Again, they cannot be on their phones. The other thing is, even though everybody's on a very similar schedule, they still need to be quiet in the halls. Everybody will be getting out at roughly the same time, but they need to be quiet until they go into the commons and that's where we want to direct them, okay? While they're down there, we will be watching. You don't have to do this. We will be watching to make sure they're not using their cell phones. Remind them as they leave that if they use their cell phones out in the lunchroom, in the commons area, they will be dismissed, okay? One person does need to stay in the room the entire time just to ensure that nobody screws with the computer. And if students don't return on time, they sort of get extra time, but try really hard to make sure that, not that they get extra time, but they will get the full time, just the way that the testing works. That's different than it has been in the past, okay? You don't have to worry about an irregularity report. If a Chromebook stops working for whatever reason and you don't have any extras, we should have plenty because we're not using very many Chromebooks from each cart. But we will have some backups in the library if you need one. Like absolutely need one, come on down. If an examinee gets sick for whatever reason, then you just come and get me or Mr. Mumford. Tell me who it is so we can schedule their makeup test. They will just get to take an all-new test. They won't just take parts of it. They'll have to take the whole thing again. If an examinee is missing, you need to let me know while testing is occurring. This is room proctor specifically. You'll need to come and tell me their name so I can remove them from the room that they're in and put them in a different room where they can test on another day. And just make sure if anything weird happens, you write it down. That's probably the biggest issue. And if you're stuck, send your proctor for help. Again, one person has to be in the room at all times. Here are a list of prohibited behaviors. If you want to pause the video for just a second and look at these, that's totally fine. Just make sure that all of these things are true, okay? If anything weird happens, you can call this number for like super weird stuff, and just write down any minor distractions that you might have. Generally, you do not have to call this number. I would just call me or Mumford, and we will take care of it from there. Okay? One of the last things that we need to talk about is people that are authorized to come in and watch are anybody if they have a badge from ACT or the Office of Education. If you see somebody and you don't recognize them, you should say, okay, who are you? And if they're from the ACT or the Office of Board of Education, they're good. People that cannot come are the media, anybody from test prep companies. I've never seen either of those. Parents cannot be here. The one that we've had an issue with in the past is school board members and district officials. Most of that time, that's not that big of a deal, but they are not supposed to be here while we are administering the test on that day. Okay, the rest of this stuff, just make sure that each test is marked completed if you're a room supervisor. You fill out all the paperwork, and again, return all your testing materials to the main office so we can take it from there. Okay, we don't have to worry about a lot of this stuff. There is an anonymous security hotline. You can see that number right here. If you feel like some sort of security has been breached and you don't want to talk to me or Mr. Mumford about it, you can call that number and they will tell us what is going on. I've never really had any of these issues, but if you feel like you have a concern that you can't talk to us about, please call this number as well, okay? Again, I want to reemphasize the makeup day is the 30th. If you have any other questions, post them in the conversation below.